You made some tweets last night, when I got home. So you make some tweets about the Green Bay Packers. And I saw you make some tweets saying how, like, this team has some shit like, I don't remember it verbatim, and I really don't feel like going to look. But basically you were saying, like, this team has no grit. This team has no fight.
I ain't say that.
I just said.
He said, lack of a better term.
Basically what I got from...
I don't know how he got that.
I don't know the tweet you're referencing.
I know which one he's
talking
about.
You know which one I'm talking about, right?
I do.
You were basically, like, just saying how the Packers just... Too many inconsistencies.
All right, here we go. Packers
please.
are now 0-4 against the top 3 teams in the NFC, Eagles, Lions, and Vikings. Can't trust their corners, can't trust their pass rush, self-inflicted wounds, penalties, and drops. Haven't won the most meaningful games they've had this season.
All right, so...
That's 100% a fact.
Yeah, so, like, are you off them after being on them before the game? Like, talk to me about that.
No, I still think they could go toe-to-toe with any team in the NFL. And
can they win
it segues perfectly to the first topic. The first topic of the show is, can the Packers punch above their weight? They have lost all of their games against top NFC opponents. You have the Eagles, you have the Lions twice, and then you have the Vikings. There's a difference, in my opinion, between losing and looking like you don't belong. When I have watched the Packers in all of these games against these top teams, I have not once thought to myself, they don't belong. Like, we know the Cowboys last year. The Cowboys, we understand when they face better competition, they don't belong.
The
It's
Dolphins.
clear
It's another one.
that when they play against worse competition, they look amazing.
100%.
When they play against better competition, they don't look good. The Packers, to me, when I watched that Lions game last night, they were a couple calls away from that game favoring them. The last drive that they had offensively, it ended up in a field goal, but a touchdown got called back for an offensive pass interference on Christian Watson.
Good call.
Was that a good call? I thought that was a little ticky-tack because Christian Watson was just running his route, and then they ran into each other.
It was close.
And on the same drive, the next drive, the Lions did the same thing with their tight end.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, an Amon-Ra on the 2nd and 17, like, basically at the first down, pushes bro off of him.
Are we going to have the conversation the Lions we do with the Chiefs?
No, it's insane. The tables have turned.
In Ohio State versus Oregon game, late game, they called Jeremiah Smith for the same thing. Big push off.
Now, Amon-Ra pushed off 100%.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
Keyshawn Nixon was on that route. He read it perfectly. And then Amon-Ra just shoved him. That's how it looked. And that's what opened up that shot for Jared Goff. So when I watched the game last night, I thought, listen, the Packers are right there. And they're one of those teams that are still dangerous. They haven't beaten those top-end teams yet. But when they faced the Eagles, they lost by 2 points. I felt like they belonged on the same field. The Eagles just executed better, and they ended up winning that game. I look at the Vikings. They were down 28-0 early, but then you had 2 missed field goals from the Packers. You had a pick 6, and then in the second half, their defense came back, and their offense played really well. It was a 2-point game in that one as well.
That's the one they looked like they didn't belong the most, but even still, like you're saying.
Yeah, and then the Lions, the first matchup, they won by 10 points, but it kind of felt like the Packers let a lot of things slip away in that one. So, to me, I think the Packers belong. This isn't a situation where I think they're frauds, they don't have a chance. No, I think the Packers are dangerous, and if they meet the Lions again, it's going to be much like what we just saw. It's going to be a game that goes down to the wire. It's going to be a coin flip game, and I do still believe in the Packers. I do. The major disappointments, in my opinion, when it comes down to their team, number one is the offensive line. Josh Myers had a 0 pass blocking grade in this one. And that was against some backups that the Lions had on the defensive line. He had his worst game of his career. The offense wasn't able to get going in the first half, but the defense, between the numbers against Tua, against Jared Goff, they let up the most completions of any team in the NFL between the numbers. Their linebackers, McDuffie and Eric Wilson, are just not linebackers that get enough depth. They sometimes drop too much, and it kills them. So that area can be exploited. In their corners, Jair's out. We understand that. Eric Stokes has been a major disappointment for them, he was a highly coveted draft pick.
Rookie safety got banged up.
There are some things with the Packers that they aren't as talented as the Eagles. No, the Eagles have a more talented roster. And Rashawn Gary and Kenny Clark, who are supposed to be the Packers' stars, they have not shown up. Rashawn Gary did not show up in this game. Kenny Clark did not show up in this game. They were awful. So there's still room for the Packers to grow, but now the season is dwindling down, and we don't have that many games left. But I feel like the Packers belong. When I watch them, it always feels like it's a close game. They might just be a play away, so they might not go far, but they belong. They're not a fraudulent team. They belong. They're extremely
I
talented.
say
It
this
could be
one
anybody.
sentence, and I'll just bring it on to you guys. You say they belong, and I hear you. However, Week 1 Eagles are not going to be playoff Eagles. I firmly believe that, and I think we all know that.
Not even close to
The
that.
Eagles are unbelievable. Their defense is, in my opinion, the best in the league. Their offense, especially because it's so centered around Saquon right now and everything that he's been able to do, they're 12 games in, and he has 1,500 rushing. He's been a menace. I look at that, and I just think that's where you failed every test so far. It's been close. They've been good games. That first Lions game, I wouldn't particularly call it close in my opinion. This one was definitely close. That Vikings game, it got close, but it really was an ass kicking to start, but it got close. I think that if you go up against the Eagles, I don't think it's going to be a result that the Packers want.
That's a tough matchup. The Lions a tough matchup too, but 2 of these 3 games we're talking about. The Eagles, it was a pretty close game throughout, but the Vikings game, you mentioned it. It was 28-7 going into halftime. The first half, the Packers just straight up got dominated. So now they're coming back from 3 touchdowns, which they almost did. They also, this early in the season when they had a bunch of kicking issues too, which is another issue, even though they were able to overcome most of that. And then last game, I know it was only 10-0 going into halftime, right? Or
10-0, you got
10-0, correct,
well,
yeah.
No, into
But the
halftime,
game last
17-7.
night?
Last
Yeah,
night.
it was 17-7.
17-7. Maybe end of first quarter, maybe I'm thinking. It was the Lions got off to that first drive. They scored a touchdown. But the Packers were really struggling to move the ball in that first half. Yeah, they had that 1 touchdown drive. That's correct. I believe it was after the Jared Goff interception, if I'm remembering that correctly. Regardless, I believe they had a
That was
shorter
second
field.
half. I know what you're talking about.
They
though.
had a shorter field, and it was all through Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs went right down the field. They were picking up chunk plays. Emmanuel Wilson was getting involved as well. And I tweeted out, that was the first time, maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic here, but it felt like the first time that Detroit was getting bullied in a game. Like, at the line of scrimmage, Green Bay was dominating them. It wasn't like that the entire game and a majority of that first half, but that drive there, they were able to put the ball on the floor for every play except 2, where Jordan Love had 1 incompletion to Tucker Kraft, who was open in the flat, and then another that was DPI, so it was overturned, and they ran the ball in with Jacobs. But they were able to dominate the line of scrimmage. That was like the one the bright shining spot they had in that first half. Second half's when they've been able to turn it on. But my point is, they haven't had in these most important games against the Eagles, maybe not as much of the Eagles, but the Vikings and the Lions specifically have not had that complete game where both sides of the ball are really playing well, because the first half of last night, the defense did about as good as you could have asked for.
I don't disagree.
Right? Like, Detroit went down, I believe the first drive, scored a touchdown, but they had a few 3 and outs in there where Detroit is probably the best offense in football right now, constantly getting first downs, getting themselves in scoring position. The Packers were able to string some stops together. It's just neither unit in these games have complemented each other at the same time. So the defense holds up for a little bit. The offense isn't there. The offense holds up. But the defense isn't there, like we saw in the second half of that game. And even still, it came down to a game-winning field goal where they went for it on 4th down. Jared Goff falls down, almost loses the game in terrible fashion. But when you're the Lions and you've built this culture and you've won 11 in a row, shit just starts going your way when you start winning like this. I think we see it a lot with different dynasties, whether it's New England, KC, when things usually for the team you root for, the other opposing team, something just a little bit goes wrong. And I feel like the Lions have that now where they're able to win 11 games in a row is insane. To win 11 straight in the NFL is ridiculous. The Jets haven't had an 11-win season maybe in my lifetime at this point. Maybe I think 1 year was right trying.
You actually didn't have to bring up the Jets.
Yeah, he
at
didn't
all.
have to.
Goddamn.
But what you described to me feels like a team that belonged on the field
They
yesterday.
did. Nah, absolutely.
Last night for sure.
They even in the first matchup, like, yeah, they lost by 10, but there were situations in that game where it made it that way. So
From what I remember, it was just basically them dominating the ground.
Lions, they in the first matchup, they won
meetup.
24-14. The Packers only punted twice. They had 411 yards of offense to the Lions, 261. They had a missed field goal in that game. They had a pick 6. That's the difference in that game, really. So it's those mistakes, in my opinion, that have costed the Packers. And in this Lions game, yeah, like a couple calls go differently. Green Bay could be on top with the Lions needing a touchdown instead of a field goal. One thing I do notice is that Dan Campbell, based off his calls throughout this game, he had ultimate respect for the Packers, going for it as much as he did on 4th down, going for it in that moment when even the analytics said for him to kick a field goal and go up, but there was respect. They have Jordan Love. They have Matt LaFleur on the other side. They can dial up a play and they could get into this field goal range and they could send it to overtime, and that's not something we want. So there is still respect between those two clubs, and like I said, I don't think the Packers are as talented as the Eagles, as the Lions. I think they have better rosters, and it's really mostly due to the players on the Packers, the players that are supposed to be stars, being unreliable. Jair has been unhealthy this year. The defensive line is not playing up to par. With the Lions, the way I'll sing their praises is the fact that they have so many injuries on that defensive line,
God.
and their run defense still swarmed to the ball. It didn't feel like they were missing anybody. Even Lee McNeil in this game didn't play as many snaps because he was in and out because of his injury. But the Lions, like, their defense was still able to play really well despite all the injuries they had. And, you know, if they had Aiden Hutchinson healthy, I think we are talking about them a little bit differently just because of how much Aaron Glenn has been able to get out of this unit. And DJ Reader will be back. It's not a season-ending injury. Aleem McNeil is a monster, so they still have pieces on the defensive line. But, like, half of their front seven is out. And for them to stifle the run like they did for most of that game was huge.
Jamal Adams playing in 2024 is crazy to think, where he was in Seattle, went to Tennessee, played a couple of games there. But honestly, all three of those teams in the NFC North, they all have a puncher's chance against each other. Like, I really do think Minnesota, Detroit, and Green Bay, they face off in the playoffs, however it is. Of course, Minnesota and Green Bay, assuming they're wild card, it wouldn't be them. But going up against Detroit, those teams, I think, have a chance against them. Being
You
in
think
division,
Minnesota has? You think Minnesota can beat the Lions in the playoffs?
I would favor the Lions for sure, but being in division, how great of a coaching staff they have, how great they've been all season long on both sides of the ball, it wouldn't shock me. Of course, Philly's in that conversation as well, but all three of those teams. The Detroit is the best team, or whatever. It's in a tier with the Eagles. But those other two teams, Green Bay and Minnesota, in a one-game playoff would not shock me if they were right there at the very end. It's a field goal game that decides it.
Like, the playoff picture right now is going to be the Packers and Vikings are going to face the winner of the NFC South or the NFC West, which could be the Seahawks, Cardinals, or the Bucs and the Falcons. And then whoever wins between those two, one of them faces the Lions, one of them faces the Eagles. So I do think, you know, we're talking about the four best teams in the NFC when we talk about the Vikings, Packers, Lions, and Eagles.
Last thing I'll say, Riff, apologize. The decision to go for it on fourth down in their own territory was pretty stupid. Like, I really was watching.
Also 4 for 5, fourth down, you know?
A part of me really doesn't care. It was a really bad decision.
I liked it.
I'm sure you did, because then they got excellent field position and they ended up scoring a touchdown.
I thought you were talking about
to end the game. I was also questioning it because they had just gone for it and failed. I was like, all right, this is interesting, but I liked it a lot more that go around because they were actually in plus territory. The first go around where they go and they get the ball to Gibbs and Gibbs just can get nowhere, that was terrible, especially because you start the half with the Packers scoring a touchdown, Goff throwing the pick in their part of the field. That's what you were alluding to, which led to them scoring another touchdown, which then you get the ball, you score to your credit. But then you go and now you are going for it in your own territory. You didn't need to get desperate like that. Mm-hmm. Like, I get your defense kind of did sell, but you put them in position when Goff throws that terrible touchdown too. Throws that terrible interception as well. That's what kind of had me scratching my head. But Dan Campbell made up with going for it, showing his hand again, and showing why he's an aggressive play caller and why sometimes that pays off, and ended up leading to a victory.
Detroit can go it forever. They could go, if it's 4th and 1, I don't care. You have too good of an offensive line, play callers,
on your
weapons.
30.
I get it. It's risky for sure.
And a 3-point game?
I get it, but you're going up against a great team. You know, like, I don't mind being aggressive. When you're that good offensively, you're saying, if you're telling me, what's the percentage chance the Detroit Lions can get 1 yard on a 4th and 1? I'm giving them like a 70% chance.
Here's the thing, though.
On the 30 is nuts, though.
I still don't mind.
Here's the thing. If Nick Sirianni does the same thing, he's getting flamed for it.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I'm trying to at least hold same energy.
Nah. No, he isn't.
Look, Green Bay goes.
If we don't do the push,
if they go 4
yes.
for 5 on the game, I don't think it matters.
No,
I also want to correct myself.
Joel, that's not true. That's not true.
He has gotten flamed for it.
if Philly's on a 4th and 1 and he does a passing play, then he's getting flamed
on their
for
own
it.
side of the field.
Yeah, I'm saying regardless, no matter where it is on the field, you have Jalen Hurts, you have Saquon Barkley, you have the best offensive line.
You wouldn't want to go for it in that situation.
I wouldn't be mad as long as we're doing the tush push or a running play. Yes, no matter where we
Yeah,
are.
remember when they did that nonsense where they were in the tush-push formation and instead they handed it to Saquon and got out?
Killed
that
them.
was stupid.
That the play call was stupid. Going for it wasn't.
Yes.
It's never.
If I
would-
see you
would
lined
love
up
going
for a
it.
tush-push and you're the Eagles and you're going for a tush-push on 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, and you don't get it, okay, great job, defense. You did something that not many teams can do, and you stopped us on like our golden play.
That's
But
fair.
what-
Third down, I wouldn't mind because
You understand, exactly. But also, I want to clarify. So, Green Bay comes out, touchdown, interception off the rip. They end up scoring on 3 plays. It was a 16-yard drive. Then they answer back with a touchdown. Now they go and they take the lead. 3 plays, 3 and out. They punt the ball, Green Bay, back to the Lions. And then the Lions on their own 30 turn it over. That's where I'm just like, you had a great play. You had a great drive. You stopped them on 3 plays. You get the ball back. Trust your defense. Trust them again. You put them in a position now where their back's against the wall, and then Jordan Love goes ahead and scores a touchdown. Now they're up 4.
Green Bay seems interesting, man. It seems like we've
Getting warm now, thankfully.
seen them at different points of the season. You know, week 1, we saw Green Bay and Philly probably at their worst in that game. Still put up 30+ points. Ended up being a really close game. You know, saw them against Detroit twice. Saw them against Minnesota. Had a really bad first half. Bounced back in the second half. For me, I look at it as like the Lions have been the most consistent team in the NFC. You know, they've been from start to finish outside of that one loss to the Buccaneers and, you know, a really terrible game
Such a
against.
funny out looking back.
Definitely was. Really a terrible game against Houston. They've been kind of the epitome of consistency and success. You look at Philly ever since the bye, they've been the most dominant team in the league, you know, top 5 on offense and defense. And you look at Minnesota, they've had their cracks in the middle, but for the most part, they've been pretty consistent. You look at Green Bay's on a different spectrum where they won a shit ton of games in a row. I think it was like 7 or 8, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. 6, 7, 8. They won a lot of games in a row. And it still felt like you were missing something with this team, or this team still haven't put things together, or they're still missing players, or players aren't playing to their potential. And with Philly and Detroit, you kind of just don't get that vibe. You know, they lost Aiden Hutchinson. The defense was still playing well. I remember the Minnesota game where the game plan was out to blitz him, and Jared Goff probably had the best game of the season against that Minnesota defense, and he was just straight carving them up. And then you look at that defense, what they were able to do to the Texans and C.J. Stroud and all that. And then you look at Philly, like what they did to Cincinnati, what they did to Baltimore, what they did to Washington coming off a hot streak they had, Jalen Carter. Like, it just feels like Green Bay hasn't been able to put it together. And I mean, they've been in these games, so you can say, you know, like they're in the hunt. They still have a chance. But I don't know how many teams I trust going into Philly in December, in January, winning a playoff game. I don't know how many teams I trust beating Detroit
0
on the road. You know, just because the way they've been so consistent, I don't think there's many teams that are going to have the blueprint to really stop them. I guess the division thing does really matter, you know, because they play each other twice a year. You kind of know who these guys are for the majority of. But just Green Bay just feels like they're missing something that these two teams aren't, which is why they aren't in that tier. And then even with Minnesota, I think they'll always hang in Minnesota because they don't have – I don't want to say Minnesota doesn't have the talent, but I think Green Bay kind of has the more names on the roster, and plus they have Jordan
Quarterback.
Love.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just
Thinking
Jordan
the
Love.
same thing.
He's really a dude. Like he's nice as hell. But I think those other two teams, it's really hard for me to say I can put the Green Bay in that tier. I can sit here and say Green Bay can beat those teams, especially if they're going on the road. Just because those two teams have been so consistent and so great on both ends, on both sides. Like Eagles secondary matching with the defensive line, you know. And I think Detroit, their secondary isn't. I don't think their secondary is as good as Philly. They're still solid. And you got Brian Branch and Lee McNeil. So Green Bay just, I don't know. They're a weird team, man. They're 0-4. They failed every test they have so far, but they still feel like, you know, you still feel like there's a sleeping giant there because we saw it last year, back end of the year. Green Bay went on a run. They ended up, we all picked Dallas. I think we all picked Dallas. They went out there, destroyed Dallas. They had a chance against the Niners to pull out that W. Unfortunately, a couple things didn't go their way. So it still feels like Green Bay is one of those teams where there's a sleeping giant, but like you mentioned earlier, the season's dwindling. It's dwindling. You don't have much time, and you're probably gonna have an easy first round against an NFC West team or an NFC South team.
They're
But
not as talented as Philly and the Lions.
This
Yeah,
loss
that's-
locked them into the wild card, though, unfortunately for them.
Yeah.
And I'll say, yes, they're 0-4 against these teams, but I'll meet somewhere in the middle. Will I say they've outright failed? They're 0-4. You could go that route, but I think that they've played decent ball against them where I won't say they outright failed. I'll give them like a C-.
And they've played well against other other 500 teams. Like they've played well against the Rams. And
Should have lost to the Bears. That's something that I do want to say. Should have lost to the Bears. And I think Caleb outperformed Jordan in that game specifically.
any given week, like the Cardinals and the Rams standing can change because of how the NFC West is. But they've beat the Rams, they've beat the Cardinals. They have some other pretty good wins in their schedule as well. So what it comes down to is that the Packers are just not as dominant up front. The Eagles have a dominant offensive line. So do the Lions. The Eagles have a dominant defensive line. The Lions, not to the degree of the Eagles, but they do have a really good defensive line, and it showed with how many backups could come in and still making your starting center look unplayable. Like, that's not a performance that I saw from the Packers offensive line all season. So that is now starting to worry me. I also think that for as much praise as we gave the receiver by committee thing last year, I think the Packers are missing a dude.
They also missed Dobbs last night too.
Yes.
You could tell. Because Dobbs had been playing really after that kind of in-house issue he had with not going to practice. I feel like he's been playing probably his best football of his career.
Yeah, they are missing a dude who can beat man coverage and that scares defenses, because right now, and it happened last year, teams blitz Jordan Love a lot because they're like, listen, we trust Carlton Davis against Dontavian Wicks. We trust them against Christian Watson. You're going to get burnt sometimes, but no, like, we trust our corners against these receivers. And the Packers are missing some of those guys. Like the Lions have Amon-Ra. Jamison Williams threatens the field vertically. The Eagles have Smitty and A.J. Brown. Like, they have dudes that can threaten your corners, and it scares you out of certain defensive looks. The Packers just don't have that.
As much as I want to defend my boy Jaden Reed, he did himself no favors yesterday.